The boarding pass. The airport was a hive of activity, with the buzz of announcements, the hum of rolling luggage, and the chatter of travelers blending into a steady rhythm. For 10-year-old Jasmine Carter, it was the soundtrack to her first great adventure. Her mother had hugged her tightly at the security gate, smoothing down Jasmine's carefully braided hair and adjusting her pink hoodie with a mix of pride and worry. "Your dad can't wait to see you, sweetheart," her mother said. "Remember, your seat is 2A in first class. You deserve to be there. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Jasmine nodded solemnly, clutching the boarding pass as if it were a golden ticket to a world of new beginnings. She didn't fully understand her mother's insistence, but had learned to trust her. Jasmine's father, Marcus, had saved for months to afford this ticket, determined to make her first trip alone something special. A first-class seat was his way of saying, "You matter." Walking down the jet bridge, Jasmine's heart raced with anticipation. The plane's interior was sleek and inviting, the plush leather seats of the first-class cabin catching her wide-eyed gaze. She placed her small backpack into the overhead compartment with effort, then settled into her seat, peering out of the window at the airport bustling below. As she reached into her bag to pull out her sketchpad, Jasmine noticed a flight attendant approaching. The woman's uniform was immaculate, her blonde hair twisted into a perfect bun. Her name tag read Heather. "Good evening, sweetheart," Heather said, her tone cheerful but her expression less so. "May I see your boarding pass?" Jasmine blinked up at her, momentarily confused. She handed over the crumpled pass with care. Heather studied it for a moment, her polite smile faltering ever so slightly. "There seems to be a mistake," Heather said. "You're actually seated in economy. Let me help you move." Jasmine's face fell. "But my mom said my seat is here. My dad booked it for me." Heather's smile tightened, and she glanced briefly toward the front of the cabin, where a businessman in a crisp suit was settling into his seat. "I understand, but there's been a mix-up. We need to reassign this seat." Jasmine hesitated. Something about the moment felt heavy, as if the air had thickened around her. The words her mother had spoken, "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise," echoed faintly in her mind. Gathering her courage, she said, "This is my seat." Heather's demeanor hardened, though her voice remained calm. "Sweetheart, we can't delay the boarding process. Please gather your things." Passengers in nearby seats shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away. No one spoke up. Jasmine, feeling small under the weight of the stairs, rose from the seat. She collected her bag and shuffled down the aisle, following Heather's brisk steps toward the economy cabin. The seats grew narrower, the space more cramped. Jasmine found herself wedged between a man absorbed in his tablet and a woman with a crying toddler. She glanced back toward the curtains separating first class from economy, the plush world she had been expelled from now out of reach. As Heather returned to the front, she nodded to the businessman who had quietly taken Jasmine's seat. He didn't even look up from his phone. Jasmine sat silently, clutching her sketchpad. Her father's voice echoed in her heart. "You matter." But here, in this crowded seat far from where she started, it didn't feel true. With trembling hands, she opened her sketchpad and began to draw, her pencil pressing harder against the page than usual. Suspicion and silence. At the front of the plane, Heather busied herself with pre-flight checks, her composure intact but her thoughts unsettled. She had made dozens of such adjustments over her years in the industry, but something about this one lingered uncomfortably in her mind. She had followed protocol, hadn't she? Yet the image of Jasmine's wide, pleading eyes haunted her. Vanessa, a junior flight attendant with only a year's experience, had watched the entire exchange. Her instincts had screamed at her to intervene, but the unspoken rules of seniority and compliance held her back. Now, as she glanced toward the economy cabin, she felt a gnawing sense of guilt. When the plane took off, Jasmine pressed her forehead against the cool window, watching the ground shrink away. The hum of the engines filled her ears, but it didn't drown out the question swirling in her mind. Why had Heather moved her? Had she done something wrong? From the corner of her eye, she noticed Vanessa approaching. The young flight attendant knelt beside her seat, her expression soft and kind. "Hi there," Vanessa said quietly. "Can I get you anything?" Jasmine shook her head but hesitated. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Vanessa's chest tightened. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong." Jasmine nodded, but her grip on the sketchpad didn't loosen. Vanessa lingered for a moment longer, then reluctantly rose and returned to her duties. Back in first class, Heather noticed Vanessa's brief detour. She frowned but said nothing. The silence in the cabin felt heavier now, punctuated only by the clink of glasses and the rustle of newspapers. A father's intuition. When the plane landed, Jasmine felt a rush of relief as she spotted her father waiting at the gate. Marcus scooped her up in a hug, holding her tightly. "How was the flight, baby girl?" he asked, his warm smile faltering when he saw her downcast expression. "It was okay," Jasmine replied softly. Marcus's eyes narrowed. He noticed how tightly she clutched her sketchpad, as if it were a shield. "What happened?" Jasmine hesitated, then said, "The lady made me move. She said there was a mistake." Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. "Which lady?" Jasmine described Heather, and Marcus felt a familiar ache settle in his chest. It wasn't the first time he had encountered such treatment, but the fact that his daughter had now experienced it ignited a quiet fury within him. "Come on," Marcus said, taking her hand. "We're not letting this go." As they walked toward the airline's customer service desk, Jasmine glanced up at her father. The determination in his stride gave her a glimmer of hope, a reminder that she wasn't alone. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Confronting the silence, Marcus Carter walked toward the airline's customer service desk with Jasmine's hand in his steps deliberate. The bustling terminal faded into the background, his focus razor-sharp. He wasn't just a father. He was a man who had spent his life navigating subtle exclusions, quiet dismissals, and unspoken barriers. But today wasn't about him. Today was about Jasmine. The airline representative at the desk, a young woman with a name tag reading Emily, smiled politely as they approached. "Good afternoon. How can I assist you today?" Marcus met her gaze steadily, his voice calm but firm. "There was an incident on my daughter's flight. She was moved out of her assigned first-class seat without explanation." Emily blinked, her professional demeanor faltering slightly. "I'm sorry to hear that. May I have the flight number and your daughter's boarding pass?" Marcus handed over the documents, watching as Emily typed into her computer. Jasmine stood quietly beside him, clutching her sketchpad, her eyes darting between her father and the representative. After a few moments, Emily looked up. "It seems the seat was reassigned mid-flight. Let me check who approved the change." Marcus's expression didn't waver, but inside, his frustration simmered. He leaned down to Jasmine and whispered, "You okay, baby girl?" Jasmine nodded but didn't speak. Her small hand tightened around his. Emily returned to the keyboard, her fingers flying over the keys. After a few more moments, she straightened. "It appears the change was approved by Heather, the lead flight attendant on your flight." "Approved?" Marcus asked, his voice low and steady. "By who?" Emily hesitated. "It's not clear. It could have been a manager or a decision made without my knowledge." Marcus interjected. "I'd like to speak with someone higher up." Emily's smile thinned. "I can escalate this to our supervisor. It may take some time." Marcus nodded, crossing his arms. "We'll wait." The wheels turned slowly. Time crawled as they sat in the waiting area. Marcus's patience was fraying, but he kept his composure for Jasmine's sake. She had begun sketching again, her pencil moving in quiet, deliberate strokes. Marcus glanced at the page. She was drawing the inside of the plane. But this time, the seats in the first-class cabin were empty. The lone figure, Jasmine herself, stood near the window, her face shaded with uncertainty. Marcus exhaled slowly, his chest tightening at the sight. He had spent his entire life teaching Jasmine to be proud of who she was, to understand her worth. The thought that someone had undermined that with a single action was unbearable. Finally, a middle-aged man in a navy suit approached. His name tag read Michael Reed, Customer Relations Manager. He extended a hand. "Mr. Carter, I understand you've had an issue." Marcus rose, his grip firm as he shook the man's hand. "My daughter was moved from her first-class seat without a valid explanation. I want to know why." Michael nodded, his face serious. "Let's sit down and talk this through." They moved to a quieter corner of the terminal. Michael opened a tablet and began scrolling through records. Jasmine stayed close to Marcus, her sketchpad balanced on her knees. After a few moments, Michael spoke. The record showed the seat was reassigned to another passenger, a frequent flyer with priority status. Marcus's jaw tightened. "So, my daughter's ticket, which I paid for, was considered less important." Michael's tone became measured. "That's not how we phrase it. Sometimes, adjustments are made based on logistical needs or unforeseen circumstances." Marcus leaned forward. "Logistical needs don't justify making a child feel unwelcome." "Who made this decision?" Michael hesitated. "It was at the discretion of Heather, the lead flight attendant. She may have received instructions from management, but I can't confirm that." Marcus's voice sharpened. "I want to speak to Heather." Michael's discomfort grew visible. "That may not be possible immediately. She's currently on another flight." Marcus crossed his arms, then escalated further. "I won't leave until I get answers." Jasmine speaks up. As the adult spoke, Jasmine's gaze shifted between them. Finally, she tugged on Marcus's sleeve. "Daddy?" Marcus turned to her, softening. "What is it, baby?" Jasmine looked at Michael, her voice small but steady. "Do you know how it feels to be told you don't belong somewhere?" Michael blinked, caught off guard. No, I suppose I don't." Jasmine held his gaze, her confidence growing. "It's not just a seat. It's about feeling like I'm not supposed to be there, even when I know I am." Michael looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You're absolutely right, young lady. And I'm sorry you felt that way." Jasmine nodded, returning to her sketchpad. Marcus gave her a small smile, pride swelling in his chest. She was stronger than anyone realized. A wider lens. Later that evening, after returning home, Marcus sat at the dining table with his laptop. Jasmine was upstairs, drawing in her room. He sifted through forums and customer complaints about the airline, discovering patterns of similar incidents. Passengers who didn't fit the profile of first-class travelers, be it because of race, age, or appearance, being quietly shifted or questioned about their presence. He felt the weight of it pressing down on him. This wasn't just about Jasmine. It was about a system that quietly undermined people like her. Marcus reached out to Vanessa, the younger flight attendant Jasmine had mentioned. After some back and forth, she agreed to meet him at a nearby cafe. The following day, they sat across from each other, steaming cups of coffee between them. "I remember your daughter," Vanessa said, her voice soft. "She was so polite, so sure of her seat. It broke my heart to see her moved." "Why didn't you stop it?" Marcus asked, his tone not accusatory but curious. Vanessa looked down, her hands wrapped tightly around her cup. "Heather's been in the industry for years. She's respected, but she's also stubborn. If I had challenged her decision, it could have cost me my job." Marcus studied her. "But you knew it was wrong." Vanessa's shoulders sagged. "Yes, and I hate that I didn't do more." "You're doing more now," Marcus said, his voice firm. "By speaking up." Vanessa nodded, her expression resolute. "I want to help." The next step. With Vanessa's account and the evidence Marcus had gathered, he contacted a lawyer. He didn't want money or apologies. He wanted change. A system that allowed quiet injustices to persist needed to be confronted. By the end of the week, Marcus had submitted a formal complaint, not just to the airline, but to aviation authorities. He wasn't just fighting for Jasmine. He was fighting for every passenger who had been made to feel small, invisible, or unworthy. As he tucked Jasmine into bed that night, she looked up at him with her wide, questioning eyes. "Did you talk to the people at the airline?" "I did," Marcus said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. "And I'm going to keep talking until they listen." Jasmine smiled faintly. "Do you think they will?" Marcus kissed her forehead. "They'll have to." Jasmine closed her eyes, her sketchpad resting beside her on the pillow. And as Marcus watched her drift to sleep, he promised himself that he would see this through, for her, and for everyone else who deserved to feel like they belonged. The quiet uproar. The week that followed Marcus's formal complaint was quiet on the surface, but buzzed with activity behind the scenes. Emails were exchanged, calls were made, and reports were reviewed. Marcus had anticipated resistance, and he wasn't disappointed. The airline's initial response was formal, almost dismissive, acknowledging his complaint while emphasizing their commitment to diversity and inclusion. It was a polished, hollow statement designed to pacify. But Marcus wasn't the kind of man to be pacified. A community awakens. It started with a single post. Marcus uploaded Jasmine's drawing to a social media platform with a simple caption, "My daughter just wanted to sit where she belonged. This is her story." The post included no accusations, no fiery rhetoric, just a father's quiet plea for fairness, paired with the image of a little girl who had been made to feel out of place. Within hours, the post gained traction. Comments poured in, parents sharing their own stories of subtle exclusions, former flight attendants recalling similar incidents, and ordinary people outraged by the quiet indignity Jasmine had endured. Local news outlets picked up the story first. Then, larger networks followed. The headline, "Young Girl Removed from First-Class Seat Sparks Debate on Airline Practices," began circulating online, drawing attention from advocates, organizations, and the general public. Jasmine didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what was happening, but she noticed how often her father's phone buzzed and how many times he was asked for interviews. She watched him speak with reporters, his voice calm but firm, always steering the conversation back to her. "This isn't just about my daughter," Marcus told a reporter during a televised interview. "It's about every child, or adult, who has been told, in subtle ways, that they don't belong. We need to do better." Jasmine sat beside him, her small hands folded in her lap. When the interviewer asked her how she felt, she hesitated before saying, "I just wanted to sit where my dad said I could. I didn't understand why I couldn't stay." Her words were simple, but their impact was profound. Behind closed doors, the airline's corporate office was in turmoil. Executives convened emergency meetings to address the growing backlash. Ethan Reynolds, the customer relations director, found himself at the center of it all. He wasn't accustomed to this level of scrutiny. Complaints were typically managed quietly, often with little more than a voucher or a polite letter. "This is spiraling out of control," one executive said, slamming a printed copy of Marcus's social media post onto the table. "We need to get ahead of this." Ethan, who had met with Marcus once already, nodded tersely. "I've been monitoring the situation. We've issued a public statement reiterating our commitment to fairness." "It's not enough," another executive interjected. "People are calling for action. They want someone held accountable." Ethan hesitated. "We've placed the lead flight attendant on administrative leave pending an internal review." "That's a start," the first executive said. "But it won't stop there." Heather, unaware of the storm brewing, had been contacted earlier that day and asked to provide a statement about her decision to move Jasmine. She justified her actions as adhering to protocol and fulfilling management requests, but even she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that her judgment had been flawed. The public outrage reached her eventually, and she found herself at the center of a controversy she hadn't anticipated. A new ally. Vanessa, the junior flight attendant, had watched the story unfold with a mix of guilt and determination. She had spoken to Marcus and filed a report, But she felt that wasn't enough. The more she read the comments on social media, the more she realized this wasn't just a single incident. It was a pattern, a symptom of something larger. When Marcus reached out to her again, this time to discuss speaking at a public forum, she didn't hesitate. The forum was held at a local community center, packed with families, activists, and reporters. Marcus stood at the podium, his tall frame commanding attention as he recounted Jasmine's experience. Vanessa sat in the audience, her heart racing as she prepared to take the stage. When Marcus finished, he introduced Vanessa. She rose, smoothing the front of her uniform as she approached the podium. "My name is Vanessa O'Connell," she began, her voice steady but soft. "I've worked as a flight attendant for over a year, and I was on the flight with Jasmine. I watched what happened, and I didn't do enough to stop it." The room fell silent. "I've seen decisions like this before," Vanessa continued. "They're not always malicious, but they're often rooted in assumptions about who belongs in first class, about who deserves comfort and respect. It's not a policy issue, it's a cultural one, and it's time we address it." Her words were met with applause, but Vanessa wasn't looking for praise. She glanced at Marcus, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. The turning point. As the forum gained media attention, the airline felt the pressure intensify. More stories surfaced. Passengers recounting similar incidents, employees sharing their struggles with bias in the workplace. The airline's leadership was forced to act. Ethan called Marcus for a second meeting, this time at the corporate office. Marcus arrived prepared, armed with evidence and the support of a growing movement. "We want to make things right," Ethan began, his tone more conciliatory than before. "We've initiated mandatory bias training for all staff, including flight attendants and management." Marcus nodded but remained guarded. "And what about accountability?" Ethan hesitated. "Heather will receive disciplinary action, and we're reviewing our policies to ensure incidents like this don't happen again." Marcus leaned forward, his voice firm. "That's a start. But this can't just be about damage control. It has to be about meaningful change." Ethan nodded, though his expression betrayed lingering discomfort. "We'll work with you to ensure that." Jasmine's voice. When Marcus returned home, he found Jasmine in the living room, surrounded by sketch pads and pencils. She was working on another drawing, this time of the forum. In the picture, Marcus stood at the podium, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "That's us, Daddy," she said, holding up the drawing. Marcus knelt beside her, studying the image. "You're a good artist, baby girl." Jasmine smiled. "Do you think they'll listen now?" Marcus pulled her into a hug, his heart heavy but hopeful. "I think they're starting to." The journey wasn't over, but it was a step forward. For Marcus, for Jasmine, and for everyone who had ever been told, in quiet and insidious ways, that they didn't belong. The ripple effect. The air inside the corporate boardroom was tense, even stifling. Ethan Reynolds stood at the head of the table, his voice clipped as he addressed the airline's executive team. They had convened for an emergency strategy meeting, spurred by the public outcry over Jasmine's story. What had begun as a single complaint had now morphed into a nationwide conversation about fairness, inclusion, and the subtle biases that shaped everyday decisions. "We can't afford for this to escalate further," Ethan said, scanning the room. "Our public image is taking a hit, and if we don't act decisively, this could affect bookings and partnerships." One of the senior executives, a sharp-featured woman named Dana Marshall, folded her arms. "What exactly are we proposing? Firing the flight attendant might satisfy the public for a moment, but it won't address the larger issue." Ethan nodded reluctantly. "We've implemented bias training, as you know, but Marcus Carter has made it clear he's looking for systemic changes. We need to show we're serious about this." Dana raised an eyebrow. "And are we?" The room fell silent, the question hanging heavy in the air. A family's strength. While the airline debated its next steps, Marcus and Jasmine were at home. Sitting at the kitchen table, Jasmine was working on another drawing, This one depicting a group of people standing together in front of an airplane. At the center was a little girl with a confident smile. Why do you think they made me move?" Jasmine asked suddenly, her pencil pausing mid-stroke. Marcus, who had been reading an email, set it down and turned to her. "I think sometimes people don't realize they're making decisions based on assumptions," he said carefully. "They might not say it out loud, but they think certain people belong in certain places." Jasmine frowned. "But that's not fair." "No, it's not," Marcus agreed, his voice firm. "And that's why we're doing this. So the next time you sit in first class, or anywhere else, no one questions if you belong." Jasmine nodded slowly, her small face thoughtful. "Do you think other kids feel like this too?" "I know they do," Marcus said. "But you've done something amazing, baby. By speaking up, you're helping make sure they don't have to feel that way." Jasmine smiled, the weight on her shoulders easing slightly. "Can we tell them too, that they belong?" Marcus leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "We already are. A public reckoning." The airline, under increasing pressure, decided to hold a public forum to address the situation. They invited passengers, employees, community leaders, and members of the media. Marcus and Jasmine were also invited, though the invitation came with a polite but firm request to keep the discussion constructive. The event was held in a large conference hall, its polished floors and high ceilings lending an air of formality. Rows of chairs filled quickly as attendees arrived, many clutching notepads or recording devices. At the front of the room, a long table with microphones awaited the panel of airline representatives, including Ethan Reynolds and Dana Marshall. Marcus and Jasmine arrived early, greeted warmly by Vanessa, who had also been invited to speak. Jasmine held tightly to her father's hand as they made their way to their seats. She felt the weight of the eyes on her, but took comfort in Marcus's calm presence. When the forum began, Ethan opened with a carefully prepared statement about the airline's commitment to improving its practices. His words were measured, polished, but ultimately uninspiring. The audience's polite applause was tepid at best. Then Marcus stood. The room quieted immediately. He approached the microphone with an air of quiet determination, glancing down at Jasmine before addressing the audience. "My daughter, Jasmine, didn't understand why she was asked to move from her seat. But the truth is, neither did I," Marcus began, his voice steady. "She was where she was supposed to be, where she belonged. But someone made a decision that said otherwise. And that decision wasn't just about a seat. It was about telling her, and by extension, others like her, that they didn't matter as much." He paused, letting the words settle. "This isn't about one flight, one incident, or one airline. It's about a culture that quietly tells people who they are and where they're allowed to be. That culture exists everywhere, in boardrooms, classrooms, and yes, airplanes. And it's time we change it." The room erupted into applause, some people standing. Marcus glanced at Jasmine, who was beaming, her small hands clapping enthusiastically. Vanessa spoke next, recounting her own experiences as a young flight attendant navigating a system that often prioritized rules over people. She admitted her guilt for not stepping in sooner during the flight and pledged to be a stronger advocate moving forward. By the time the forum ended, the mood in the room had shifted. The airline's representatives, including Ethan, looked more subdued, as if they finally grasped the gravity of what they were facing. Corporate change. In the weeks that followed, the airline announced a series of changes. They implemented a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior, expanded their training programs to include real-life scenarios, and created a new position, Director of Equity and Inclusion, to oversee these efforts. Heather, the flight attendant at the center of the controversy, was quietly let go. The airline's internal review found that while she hadn't acted with malice, her decision reflected poor judgment and a lack of awareness. Marcus received a personal letter from Dana Marshall, acknowledging the shortcomings in the airline's response and pledging to do better. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step. A new perspective. One sunny Saturday morning, Marcus and Jasmine sat on a park bench, watching planes soar overhead. Jasmine had brought her sketchpad, and she was working on a new piece. This time, she was drawing a plane filled with smiling passengers of all ages and backgrounds. "Do you think it'll really change, Daddy?" she asked, not looking up. Marcus considered her question carefully. "I think change takes time, and it's not always easy, but people are listening now. That's a start." Jasmine nodded, her pencil moving across the page. "Maybe one day, no one will have to wonder if they belong." Marcus smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "Maybe one day, baby girl." As they sat there, basking in the sunlight, Marcus realized something. Jasmine had turned her pain into purpose. And in doing so, she had taught him, and the world, a powerful lesson about belonging, courage, and the quiet strength of a single voice. The tide of change. The story of Jasmine's flight had gone beyond her, beyond Marcus, beyond even the airline. It had become a symbol, a rallying point for conversations about fairness, representation, and the silent indignities that often go unnoticed. Jasmine's simple act of speaking up had sparked something much larger than any of them anticipated. The school assembly. At Jasmine's elementary school, the administration decided to host a special assembly on diversity and inclusion. Marcus was invited to speak, and the school asked if Jasmine would like to share her story as well. When Marcus told Jasmine about the invitation, she hesitated. "What if people don't want to hear what I have to say?" she asked, clutching her sketchpad. Marcus knelt beside her. "Baby girl, they invited you because they do want to hear what you have to say. And what you have to say is important." Jasmine looked at him, her small face thoughtful. Finally, she nodded. "Okay, I'll do it." The day of the assembly, the school gym buzzed with chatter as students, teachers, and parents filled the bleachers. Jasmine sat in the front row with her sketchpad balanced on her knees, her nerves bubbling just beneath the surface. When her name was called, Marcus gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "You've got this," he whispered. Jasmine walked to the microphone, her steps small but deliberate. She placed her sketchpad on the podium and looked out at the sea of faces. For a moment, the words caught in her throat. Then she remembered her father's steady encouragement and the courage she had found on the plane. "Hi," she began, her voice soft but clear. "My name is Jasmine Carter, and I want to tell you about something that happened to me." She recounted her experience on the flight, her words simple but powerful. She spoke about how it felt to be asked to move, how she wondered if she had done something wrong, and how her father had helped her understand that she hadn't. "I learned that sometimes people make decisions because of what they think about you, not who you really are," Jasmine said, glancing at Marcus in the audience. "But my dad always tells me that I belong wherever I'm supposed to be, and I think everyone should feel that way." When she finished, the gym erupted into applause. Jasmine blinked, surprised by the warmth of the response. She looked at Marcus, who was clapping the loudest of all. After the assembly, several parents approached Marcus to thank him for sharing their story. One mother, a woman with a soft voice and tired eyes, told him, "My daughter went through something similar at a summer camp. Thank you for showing her that it's okay to speak up." Marcus smiled, his chest swelling with pride for Jasmine. It's amazing what kids can teach us when we give them the chance. A growing movement. Meanwhile, Marcus's social media post continued to gain traction. Activists, educators, and public figures began sharing it, using Jasmine's story as a lens to examine broader issues. Schools and organizations invited Marcus to speak at events, while Jasmine became an unexpected source of inspiration for children and adults alike. The airline, now under increased scrutiny, doubled down on its efforts to improve. They released a new set of guidelines aimed at ensuring equity in seat assignments, alongside a transparent reporting system for passengers and employees to flag discriminatory practices. They also launched a public awareness campaign titled "Everyone Belongs Here," featuring stories of passengers from diverse backgrounds. Vanessa, The flight attendant who had supported Jasmine became a vocal advocate within the airline. Her courage in stepping forward earned her respect among her colleagues, and she was eventually promoted to a leadership role in the airline's new diversity and inclusion program. Heather, the flight attendant who had moved Jasmine, reached out to Marcus privately. In her email, she expressed regret for her actions and explained that she had been under pressure to accommodate a high-priority passenger. "I realize now that I should have stood my ground." Heather wrote, "I'm sorry for the hurt I caused your daughter. I've learned a lot from this, and I hope to do better moving forward." Marcus shared the email with Jasmine, who studied it carefully before asking, "Do you think she means it?" "I think she does," Marcus said. "And I think everyone deserves a chance to learn and grow." Jasmine nodded, her small fingers tracing the edges of her sketchpad. "Maybe I'll draw her again," she said thoughtfully. "But this time, I'll make her smile." The national spotlight. Jasmine's story eventually caught the attention of a major news network, which invited Marcus and Jasmine for an interview. The studio was bright and bustling, a flurry of lights, cameras, and people. Jasmine clutched Marcus's hand tightly as they were led to their seats. The interviewer, a poised woman with a warm smile, leaned forward as she addressed them. "Jasmine, you've inspired so many people with your bravery. How does that make you feel?" Jasmine looked at Marcus, then back at the interviewer. "It makes me feel happy," she said. "But I think it's not just about me. It's about everybody feeling like they belong." The interviewer nodded. "And Marcus, as a father, what's been the most important lesson for you in all of this?" Marcus's expression softened as he glanced at Jasmine. "The most important lesson is that even small voices can make a big difference. Jasmine reminded me that speaking up isn't just about being heard. It's about helping others feel seen." The segment aired later that evening, sparking another wave of conversation. Messages of support flooded Marcus's inbox, many from parents thanking him for advocating not just for Jasmine but for all children. The world through Jasmine's eyes. One quiet evening, Marcus found Jasmine sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by her sketches. She had drawn dozens of pictures of airplanes, families, flight attendants, and passengers of all shapes, sizes, and colors. In each drawing, the people were smiling, their hands outstretched toward one another. "Can I show these to the airline?" Jasmine asked, looking up at Marcus. "Maybe they can use them for their ads." Marcus smiled, his chest tight with pride. "That's a great idea, baby girl." The airline loved Jasmine's drawings and incorporated them into their Everyone Belongs Here campaign. Her artwork appeared on posters, billboards, and social media, spreading her message of inclusivity far and wide. A legacy of belonging. Months later, as Marcus and Jasmine boarded another flight, this time to visit Jasmine's grandmother, she walked confidently into the first-class cabin and took her seat. The flight attendants greeted her warmly, and one even complimented her sketches, which had become widely recognized. Jasmine beamed at Marcus. "I feel like I belong," she said. "You always have, baby girl," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And now so does everyone else." As the plane took off, Jasmine pulled out her sketchpad and began to draw. This time, she drew herself sitting in her first-class seat, her head held high, surrounded by a world that finally understood what it meant to truly belong. A world redrawn. The summer morning was warm and inviting as Marcus and Jasmine stood at the entrance of the community center. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. Today marked the opening of a traveling exhibit called Through Jasmine's Eyes, featuring her drawings and the story behind them. What had started as a quiet act of resilience on a single flight had grown into a movement that was now inspiring communities far beyond their small hometown. The exhibit was Jasmine's idea. When Marcus had suggested they donate some of her drawings to the airline for their campaign, Jasmine had gone a step further. "Why don't we show everyone?" she had asked, her eyes wide with excitement. "Not just the airline. Everyone." Marcus had been hesitant at first, worried the attention might overwhelm her. But Jasmine's confidence reassured him. She wanted her story, and her art, to reach as many people as possible, to show them what belonging could look like. The exhibit had taken months to prepare, with volunteers and local artists pitching in to help. Now, as Marcus and Jasmine stepped inside, they were greeted by rows of easels, digital screens, and interactive displays, all showcasing Jasmine's work. The exhibit unveiled. At the entrance, visitors were greeted by a large banner that read, "Through Jasmine's Eyes, a Journey of Belonging." Beneath it, a brief description of her story set the stage for what lay ahead. In a world where small moments can carry big lessons, one little girl's journey on a flight became a catalyst for change. Through her art, Jasmine Carter teaches us about courage, inclusion, and the power of standing up for what's right. This exhibit invites you to see the world as she does, vibrant, hopeful, and filled with the possibility of belonging for all. The first section of the exhibit featured Jasmine's original sketches. Each drawing was accompanied by a brief description written by her, explaining what she had been feeling or thinking when she created it. Visitors lingered at the images of the first-class cabin, the flight attendants, and Jasmine herself, depicted with her trademark shy smile. "This one is my favorite," a woman said, pointing to a sketch of Jasmine standing in front of her first-class seat. "Look at how proud she looks." Nearby, Marcus watched the reactions with quiet pride. Jasmine stood beside him, her small hand wrapped around his, her face a mixture of shyness and excitement. "Do you think they like it?" she whispered. "I don't think, baby girl," Marcus said, smiling down at her. "I know." Stories shared, stories heard. As the exhibit moved through its run, it became clear that Jasmine's story had unlocked something in people. Visitors left notes in a guest book at the end of the exhibit, many sharing their own experiences with exclusion or moments when they had felt out of place. "I remember when I was the only girl in my math class," one entry read. "Thank you for reminding me that I belonged there, even when no one else thought so." Another note, written in a careful script, said, "As a father, your story inspires me to teach my daughter that she has every right to take up space in this world." Jasmine read every note with fascination, her eyes lighting up at each story. "They're like me," she said one evening as she flipped through the pages. "A lot of people feel like they don't belong." Marcus nodded. "And you've shown them they do. That's a gift, Jasmine. A new opportunity." The exhibit caught the attention of educators and community leaders across the country. Soon, requests began pouring in for Jasmine and Marcus to bring the exhibit to other cities. Libraries, schools, and museums wanted to host Through Jasmine's Eyes, each eager to spread its message of inclusion. Marcus hesitated. Traveling would mean disrupting their routine, and he worried about how Jasmine would handle the attention. But Jasmine was undeterred. "We have to go," she said firmly one evening as they discussed the requests. "If it helps even one person, it's worth it." Marcus couldn't argue with that. He agreed, and over the next year, they traveled to cities big and small, sharing Jasmine's story and art with thousands of people. Each stop brought new connections, new stories, and new hope. At one event in New York City, a young boy approached Jasmine after her presentation. He held out a sketchpad of his own, the pages filled with colorful drawings. "I like to draw too," he said shyly. "I think your pictures are really cool." Jasmine beamed. "Thank you. Do you want to draw something together?" The boy nodded eagerly, and the two sat down at a nearby table, their pencils scratching against the paper as a crowd watched in admiration. The airline's transformation. Meanwhile, the airline continued its efforts to improve. The Everyone Belongs Here campaign had expanded, and employee feedback suggested that the new training programs were making a difference. Vanessa, now a key figure in the airline's diversity initiatives, worked tirelessly to ensure the changes were meaningful and lasting. She stayed in touch with Marcus and Jasmine, often updating them on the airline's progress. Your story shook things up in ways I never thought possible, she told Marcus during one call. It's not perfect yet, but we're getting there. Heather, the flight attendant who had moved Jasmine from her seat, had also undergone a transformation. She had enrolled in courses on bias and inclusion and had become a vocal advocate for fair treatment in her new role with another airline. Though her career had taken a different path, she remained grateful for the lessons she had learned, a lasting legacy. Years later, Through Jasmine's Eyes had become a staple in schools and museums across the country. Jasmine, now a teenager, continued to draw, her art evolving, but always carrying the same message of hope and inclusion. On the anniversary of the original flight, the airline invited Jasmine and Marcus to a special event honoring their contributions to change. The event included a gallery of Jasmine's work and a ceremony unveiling a new initiative, the Jasmine Carter Scholarship for Young Artists, aimed at supporting students who used their creativity to promote social justice. Jasmine stood on the stage beside Marcus, her heart swelling with pride as the audience applauded. When it was her turn to speak, she stepped up to the microphone, her voice steady and confident. I've learned that even small things, like a drawing or speaking up, can make a big difference, she said. But I didn't do this alone. My dad showed me what it means to stand up for what's right, and so many people believed in me along the way. This isn't just my story. It's ours. The applause was thunderous. As they left the event that evening, Jasmine looked up at Marcus. Do you think we really made a difference? Marcus smiled, his arm draped protectively around her shoulders. I don't think, Jasmine. I know. And as they walked out into the cool night air, Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the journey they had taken, but for the courage of a little girl who had shown the world what it truly meant to belong.